Thanks for listening today. I want to be transparent with you. Besides hosting this podcast, I also work for Everly Health, our sponsor for today's episode. However, all views and opinions expressed on the podcast are my own or those of my guests, not those of Everly Health. Great. So, welcome back to Digital MD, the podcast where we talk to leaders in digital health about everything innovation, decision making, and how we think. So, I'm your host, Dr. Liz Kuo, and today I'm thrilled to have Kavita Patel with us. So, Dr. Kavita Patel is a physician based in Washington, D.C., who advises all sorts of healthcare companies. And in the venture world, she works for a company called New Enterprise Associates, called NEA. She has extensive background, everything from public policy as the director of policy for the White House under President Obama, and also has done a ton of work in her tenured roles as she played pivotal roles in the pandemic, healthcare reform. And right now she is this incredible spokesperson across not only women's health and women initiatives and leadership, but she was also an CNBC contributor. So most recently, she was appointed as a professor of medicine at Stanford. So Kavita, I just want to say thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Liz.
So tell me a little bit about yourself. And I also wanted to say that we met because she is an incredibly, not only influential leader across what I've seen, but we had multiple friends. And when she made the jump from policy into venture, she and I both talked a lot about what does it mean to be a woman and a female leader and a doctor, and how do you think about finances and all of that. So we can start anywhere. Where do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, maybe we'll start with what kind of mutually joins us being a doctor. I think that healthcare has always been, whether I knew what it would lead to or not, it's always been something that drives me. I know it kind of gets you waking up in the morning and going to bed at night. And it's something that I've had a lot more people lately ask me, one, if I practice, and I still do. And two, they've asked me how important it is to keep a practice or some kind of clinical activity. And I think I will just say that for me, it's been, I joke a little bit that it's my insurance, because if I lose all those jobs you just mentioned, I can always still be a doctor. And pretty much you and I could work wherever we wanted to in the world if we wanted to. But the truth is that it's probably the one thing that reminds me or kind of grounds me in, like, when I start getting lost in term sheets or manuscripts or TV or this or that, I kind of go back to something very basic, and it reminds me of, like, okay, this is why we have to fix the system. Like, this is still pretty broken, and we still need a lot of smart, I'm going to put a plug in, smart women to help drive the improvement in healthcare.
I love that. Yes, at some point in the future, I'd like to retire and be a barefoot doctor traveling the world. Right now, though, I feel like all these great innovations, and I want to just make sure it's accessible and we can bring it through. And I also want to talk to you about some of the ways that you balance not only the investment head, but the side of policy. So what made you make the transition from being a doctor to policy to now on the investment side?
Liz, I wish I could tell you it was something elegant where I planned for it. It 100% was not. I was a Democrat. I was a hardcore Democrat. You just went through my history. I worked for Barack Obama and Senator Edward Kennedy. I couldn't work for two bigger Democrats. And so I worked for two huge Democrats. I'm a big self-professed Democrat. And in 2016, I found myself with Donald Trump being the president. And so a very close friend called me and said, hey, I think it's about time you start making money. And I think this is another one of these, like, I don't know why, but for women, sometimes it somehow seems shameful to say, you know what, I want to go out there and make money. And it was a male colleague. And you and I have spoken about the fact that many times in order to succeed as a woman, we need men who kind of, I've called it like RSVPing us into the right rooms. They're kind of making sure that we're included in the right rooms. And this was one of those men. And he basically said, like, I think you should make money, and I think there's a role for you in venture. And so it started as a very simple advising gig at NEA, where I would just help companies that looked like they were having some regulatory issues. That soon translated to an 8-year career where I now have active investments and have helped started new companies and have an incredible, I would say, roster of people I've worked with, as well as colleagues in the investment community. But I have never kind of given up the policy stuff because, as you know, healthcare is not just highly regulated, but it's subject to the it's subject to the whims of policy. If MA is out and
Mm-hmm.
MCOs are in, or work that you're doing at your company, if people are really hungry for content and thinking about women's health differently, then that becomes something that can be incredibly important for private companies to consider.
I mean, you talk about so many things, and I want to also highlight how important it is that I feel like you found a really good niche. Like, you know what MCOs are, you know what MA is, Medicare Advantage.
Right,
Not many people always in healthcare do. So I
right.
talk about this. So in my latest book about digital MD, it's revolutionizing the future of healthcare, the 5 Ps. And you've been all five, which is amazing, right? You've been on the payer policy side, pioneers, and then also provider, and then patients. But policymakers, I feel like we sometimes think about them as hurdles. But sometimes, if you time the market right and you know there's something that's hot, Medicaid in a certain space,
Right.
it can really help drive innovation. And if you invest in the right places, you've blended a lot of that. And I feel like that's pretty incredible to find that role. Would you agree? And then also, what makes a good investor? Because something that is interesting, a lot of people ask, how do I get on the investment side? But it actually requires a pretty important skill set of a few different things, like not only loneliness that you experience, but also being able to network and thinking about the bigger picture of things.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad you brought that up. So, a couple of things. I really want to underscore your book because I think Digital MD is, you might look at the title and say, well, I'm not really into digital. It's far beyond even the title. I think it's just a helpful way to amp you up and give you a little bit of motivation in case if you find yourself not necessarily even being two or three of those P's, it makes the other parts of it less daunting. So I think it's just a
Mm,
very approachable read. And I would highly encourage anyone listening to this to go onto your favorite place to buy books and buy this book. And I say that without any return other than
thank you.
knowing Liz is incredibly disciplined. So number one, I would say the key, I'll start with like kind of what makes for someone in venture. I like to think that those of us in medicine are also kind of students of psychology in a way. We like
Mm,
some of the reasons I like being an internist is I like watching stories unfold and kind of being a part of people's lives. And so I feel that same way in the investment world. Sometimes I feel like I'm out in the wild at a zoo and I'm watching like, all the
yes.
things around me. And I'm one of those animals too. And I would say number one, it's intellectual curiosity. You hear a lot in investments, no matter what sector you're in, about deal flow. You kind of hear this theme a lot, like how, if you're a small fund or a large fund like NEA, how do you find deals? How do you find operators? It's not, yes, you can hang out at conferences and you and I can go and we can network. And I've seen you at these conferences. The
Hmm.
real important work is the intellectual curiosity, getting to know somebody, regardless of whether they're on a hot term sheet or whether nobody has spoken to them about their company idea. And so I tend to be that person that I have a soft spot for physician founders. I admit it. I
Mm,
will always try to talk to a physician founder because I just
mm,
think that because of the reasons you and I are bonded by this. But so number one, intellectual curiosity. Number two is this kind of understanding of the network. And I think that that comes from understanding LPs. I think it was very hard when I first approached venture. I did not have as much of an appreciation, Liz, for how important limited partners, that is the people who, and for NEA, it's people like Texas teachers, for its retirement funds, it's these large kind of family funds. These
hmm.
are people who have said, we're going to give you a lot of money or a little bit of money, but some of our money, and we're going to trust you with it. And you're going to do good things with it. And you're not going to embarrass us with it. And so then when you understand kind of how capital moves and how people are invested in you, and then you understand a little bit more about, well, why are venture capitalists so fixated on the returns and at certain time frames, then you start
Yes.
to understand a little bit about the kinds of work you need to do. At NEA, we pride ourselves on not being the standard 7 years. We have had companies, I'm part of them, where we're 8 years in and we have no near exit whatsoever. And then third is really understanding operators. Liz,
Mm,
you're amazing at operating. You are a beast at it. And I think it's not a quality everyone has. I think understanding how hard it is to be an operator makes for a great investor because then you
mhm.
realize that you're really an operator no matter where you are. You could be CEO, C-suite, you could even be like right under the C-suite. But a great investor understands talent and understands how to bring the best out of that talent. And that sometimes
Yes.
also means firing and getting rid of talent, which is a very hard topic that especially women sometimes hesitate on, because we tend to want, not making class, I don't want to make this overall statement about all gender,
Yes.
but we tend to want to kind of give people a chance. And I have seen it now time and time again. But one piece of advice I have for anyone listening who's even thinking about or is in investing, if you have your doubts about leadership, it's probably too late. So you need to make action quickly. And you and I have
Mm-hmm.
spoken about this, about some companies we have in common, where I've said,
Yes.
if I'm thinking and I have doubts, it's too late and I need to do something. And so those are some keys. And I also think that for the policy, just I'll close on this policy piece to your point about how important it can be to drive innovation. I'll give you a very practical example. I have been involved in cell therapy companies on the biotech side now for over
Mm-hmm.
10 years, and just kind of watching them and now being involved and now on the board of a CAR T company. There is no
Great.
great model for how we pay for this, but guess what? It is incredibly, CMS is actually in this ripe moment where when we have conversations with CMS and we say, here's really how the payment model should be structured and how it'll
Yes.
give you value, they're like, this is amazing. Can you write this up? Can you tell us more? And so
It's educating them,
it's
right?
educating them, right? And then I see the exact same thing happening with AI. There is no CMS reimbursement code for anything that uses a large language model at this time. And note I say at
Mm-hmm.
this time. I think that the key will be understanding and I obviously focus on a lot of payment issues, but when you have that policy knowledge and then you can apply it into some of the ways that we're thinking about the use of LLMs and generative AI in healthcare, finding a way to pay for that beyond just like hot term sheets and people who will pay for it is gold. And so those are great examples. I wouldn't have been able to sit here and tell you that if I hadn't had, like, I don't know, 15 years of trying to understand how Medicare works. So
Yes. Yes.
that doesn't mean everybody needs that, but I think everybody has to have a respect for it. When I see smart investors who see people like you or me and they really want to learn from them, it's honestly, it's what Warren Buffett, it's what Charlie Munger, it's what some of the
Mm-hmm.
greatest of the great investors do. They don't just find people who know exactly what they know, they find people who don't. And that's what I try to do every single week. I try to do something that is completely foreign from my discipline, so I learn
Mm-hmm.
something new and just have respect.
We've touched on so many things, and I could talk to you forever about this because, like number one, about this idea of being very good at not only curiosity but thinking through how are you kind as a female leader or not, whatever gender, but being kind but decisive.
Yeah,
And I feel like as an operator, you have to be very decisive. I've gone through so many rifts, like reductions in force, where I've
yeah,
had to let go of 50% of my staff or whatever it is, and you have
right,
to do it with a certainty of a conviction, but still being able to treat people with kindness and honor
right.
and respect, but being able to say this is an important business decision you make. And I feel like even as physicians and or anyone that's in clinical, you can build some of that empathy and kindness into the way that you practice and operate. But
Right.
also, I think there's a sense of, like you said, a psychology and I'm a psychiatrist sometimes across boards or meetings or whatnot, where I'm
Hmm.
understanding people's motivations. I say, well, actually, if I could move your partner, when I'm trying to recruit a CEO or whatnot, and I have to talk about their life and their family and what they're hoping for, there are lots of the subtleties that I think if you're able to be, I would say, not only empathetic but able to hear between the lines and then operate between the lines, you're able to be much more effective. I feel like you're saying a lot of that too, and you probably do that very well as an operator too.
Yeah, and it's true with other investors, by the way. So I think the most kind of critical examples of that psychology playing out is when you're in a company that's struggling and you're looking at financing again, and you might, like at NEA, we might have money allocated for follow-on financing, but we depend on all the people around us to put in their share. Well,
Mm-hmm.
everybody starts doing a little bit of the, well, how much are you going to put in? Oh,
Mm.
what do we think about the team? How do we
Yes.
feel about this? And you really do need one of the investors to kind of ride up and say, all right, this is the plan. Like, and they might not even have the largest check, but we need somebody to lead. And it's a very human nature. It's like, it seems like it's one of these critical things that happen when you have a group, that
Mm.
everybody wants a leader. And so
Mm.
sometimes I think, so anybody who's either trying to start out in investments or is very junior, might be in an associate or kind of a principal role and thinking, how do I do this? these are the building blocks when I see like who makes for a great investor. And when I look at the very, very kind of people you and I have come to respect for not just being operators, but turning it maybe even into investors, but also having a reputation for broadening their circle rather than
Mm-hmm.
narrowing it, it is
Mm-hmm.
always usually those qualities. They step up and they lead and they listen and they tend to be curious around them.
I love it. Did you know that improving preventive care can significantly impact your health plan star ratings? Everly Health Solutions is the leader in at home testing for health plans. Their convenient, member centric approach has helped plans achieve industry leading results. In just 1 year, Everly Health Solutions helped a multi state Medicare group improve 15 of their plans by at least 1 star. That's a win for members, providers, and the plans themselves. Learn how Everly Health Solutions can elevate your health plan at everlyhealthsolutions.com. I have two more questions for you, and then we usually do this hot takes at the end of
Yes.
programming.
I'm very
But
excited. Yes.
you talked about this earlier, which is sort of how do you, when you say broadening your network, broadening your perspective. You and I have talked about how we see a lot of female founders who are early stage, and a lot of times, even for the Series C, D, when we're later stage, it tends to be male founders. And I would really like to hone in on what advice do you have for female founders? And you and I talked about acting like you're a $1 billion company and having that confidence and speaking about that and building out your network like that. Can you speak about it
Yeah.
just for the viewers and listeners?
Yeah, I do. And it's because I had noticed a trend where I had not really been seen. I am actively, this is not a pitch, but I've been actively like looking for an investment in women's health. But I've been a little bit like Goldilocks. Nothing's quite the right fit. And so, at a place like NEA, that means we might start something ourselves. But for about 8 years, I've been looking, whether it's fertility and
Mm.
birthing, menopause, everything in between. And everybody says, well, it's because you're a woman. I mean, sure, yes, that might be it, but it's also because it's been one of the most underaddressed sectors in healthcare.
Yes.
So it's an important one. And it's been funny, Liz, I've been watching, and I could go through and collect all my term sheets and all my PowerPoints, and I would say only about one or two of about literally 40 companies are women. So in a space that should be dominated by more women than men, the majority of the founders I've been seeing are men.
Men.
When I started to ask and say, why is that? I said to my associate, who's amazing on our team that does women's health, I said, can you go and find me earlier stage companies? Because I just had a gut feeling that there's a lot of smart women doing things. I just don't know where they are. Turns out, yes, it was right. When we started to open up to more seed and people who were in the kind of pre-seed even idea,
Earlier stage.
yes. So coming out of, think of like Rock Health, places you and I have like, spent time just advising and mentoring.
Mm-hmm.
Lo and behold, the majority or the plurality are women. And when I stop and I think about what's the difference between their thesis, their presentation style, everything, there's so many aspects to it, but briefly it comes from not coming into the room, Zoom or real, with this feeling that this can be a $1 billion company. Sure, the TAM always looks like $1 billion, and there's that proverbial TAM slide, but there's a certain kind of projection that you can tell that when they're talking to you about the funding, the ramp, the proceeds, there's an energy that sometimes I know there's a bit of like, I don't want to conflate anything, but I find most of the time they spend a lot on that initial thesis and why they came to this space. And then I don't hear enough of that conviction of, and this is going to be a $1 billion company and you're going to miss out if you're not part of it now. And I'm not saying those exact words in that order, but that sense doesn't come across. Now, you could say that's because they're pre-seed and they're seed, but I can tell you that I've worked with seed companies and it tends to not feel that way when you do have one of those seeds that has usually it's a bit of a formula, Liz. It's like
Yes.
ex-Optum operator,
Yeah.
lots
Love
of
it. Yes.
lots of conviction in the person, and then let's go rush to figure out how to fund him.
That's right. And there's
see
a
lot of that.
support around that, right?
And there's a support.
As opposed to, new investor, a new founder, not
Right.
entirely, maybe came from clinical, maybe came from something else. family motivation or personal motivation, but not the type of gumption that you
Right.
want to see.
So
Yeah.
think like I joke, it's there's a running joke in my team. I'm like, I need you to think like you used to work at Optum, and they look at me
Yes.
like, what are you talking about? And I said, just hear me out. I said, think like you worked at Optum, and I think like everybody else around you worked at Optum too, and just be confident because you do have $1 billion idea, and you
Yes.
should be. I said, and you're going to be wealthy beyond your dreams because then you're going to pay it forward, and you're going to fund some seed companies. You're going to do what Liz, I know you do. You're going to angel invest, you're going to mentor,
Hmm.
and you're going to make the world better. And that's the other thing. Don't be shy about that wealth. So
So
that's
that point actually is a great bridge to what I was going to ask you, just to wrap up a bit on how do you help women in general think about not only thinking big, but being comfortable with wealth and wealth creation, and how do you also make sure that you can support them in giving back? There's so much I want to
right.
unpack with you,
Sure.
but what do you how do you mentor women in that
Yeah.
space?
I mean, I'd like to say that I mentor a lot of women. It's not that many, and it's not because I'm not. I like to think I'm nice. It's just sometimes I find the women mostly through Stanford. So I teach the graduate course in
That's right.
policy. I teach a graduate course in policy to master's level students at Stanford, and many of them are women. So I end up finding women probably more through that route. Number one, I tell them not to be shy about wanting to make a lot of money, and the way I pair it is what I had to tell myself. Why on earth would I want to deny the ability to have a legacy beyond myself? So
Mm,
not just, oh, Kavita was very nice and she was smart and did good things, but there's something lasting that made the world better. It doesn't always have to be money, by the way. However, it can often be something that generational wealth, not just for your family, but also something that you can leave the world in a better place with. And when I
hmm.
start to tell people, if you stop worrying so much about feeling bad about making money and actually do it, and then find yourself having opportunities to support and do all the things you wanted to do personally and professionally, why wouldn't you do that? Isn't that exactly what being an
Yes. Mm.
amazing woman is? And then you start to get over it. And I got over it myself. And now I have no problem, Liz, walking into a room and saying, I want to make incredible amounts of money. And then someone will laugh and I'll say, I'll say nobody would laugh at, nobody laughed at whatever, name any man that walks in a room and says, I have $1 billion idea. And I say,
Mm.
I want to make a lot of money so I can create more wealth for, honestly, I again told you I bias towards physicians. I want to create a lot of wealth for some of those ambitious physician founders who are going to keep making healthcare better.
I love that. I feel the same way. I feel like you, by the way, you have found your gift. It's like if the meaning of life is to find your gift, the
Right.
purpose of life is to sort
Yeah.
of give it away. And I feel like you've given a lot of not only advice, but the mission of creating wealth for yourself and your
Right.
family. And I feel the same way about the legacy that I'm hoping to leave behind. So,
Yeah. It took a while. It wasn't easy to get there, but it came. It
yes.
happened.
Well,
All
it's
right. Are
been
we
an
doing hot
absolute
takes?
pleasure. I want
Are
to
we
say, yes, we're going to do
all
hot
right?
takes. Best
Yeah,
advice
I'll
you want
kind
to,
of yes.
please.
Best advice I want to give is outsource. You can be 10x of yourself if you start to take a true time audit. And Liz, until I did a true time audit, like look at the shit in my schedule and say what's like a big pile of poop and what's actually gold. And when you get rid of the poop and outsource it, it's crazy. Use things like Upwork, TaskRabbit. I shamelessly outsource every aspect of my life so that I have
Yes.
time for my kids and time to talk to people like you. That's the best advice I'm going to give. My favorite business quote, Charlie Munger. There's a theme here. I
Hmm.
constantly see people rise in life who are not the smartest, sometimes not even the most diligent, but they are learning machines. They go to bed every night a little wiser than they were when they got up. And boy, does that help, particularly when you have a long run ahead of you.
Mm.
The hardest challenge I've ever had to overcome is that my sports when I was a kid, I'm Indian, were spelling and math. And so my hardest challenge was at the age of 30, I decided I wanted to run a marathon. And I
Mm.
started it because I was like, I'm just going to run the marathon. I'm just going to start pretend I'm going to run the marathon because I'm
Yeah.
this kind of unathletic Indian girl. And I did it. And then I ran subsequent marathons and half marathons. And people look at you and they're like, you don't look like a marathoner, but it's all mental. It has nothing to do with your physical strength. It's
Congrats.
all mental. So I'm here to tell
Yes.
people that. Um, and then I know you have another question. What's most exciting for me about healthcare innovation right now? is that I do think that we're in this, it's not AI for the sake of AI. It's just that we're in another kind of industrial revolutionary inflection
Mm.
point. The other one existed several decades ago with the internet when I was not even a medical student yet. And I feel like I didn't understand it and appreciate it. And now I can appreciate it. And I think it's exciting. And I can't wait to see what you and I will talk about in like 10 years. And that's probably the best thing. And then finally, my
Mm.
superpower, it would be being invisible so I could spy on my children. Not because they do anything insidious, but I just think they're so cute. And sometimes I wonder what they do, like when I'm not around. So I just like to spy on them.
Oh, I have to say, we had another guest who said they want to read the minds of their children, which is also
I
another
don't
one.
that would be one way to do it. I would just like to kind of be a voyeur in their lives sometimes, like when they're talking to their friends or like when they're, by themselves. I'd love to kind of know what they're doing. So
I
that would
love
be,
that you went that way.
yeah,
I had a panel the other day, and I'll just say this because it's hilarious. It was like, what advice would you give? So one panelist said, this is David Mal, he'll be very open about it. He said, oh, like be data driven. And then the next panelist was like, spend more time with my wife. That's what and he was like, oh, I changed my mind. I wanted to say, walk old
it's
ladies
true.
across the street. And so,
So I have had the chance to be in a room with billionaires. It was like very random and more because my policy life, I was nowhere near, not anywhere near being a billionaire. But the one thing that was interesting, Liz, that was true, and I know we both have to go because our lives are always scheduled, but hopefully good schedule because the audit I did of my
yes.
time. The one thing I'll say is that not a single billionaire talks about, these are all titans of business. Nobody
Mm,
talks about business. They all, and this is a
mm,
room where they were able to talk about any topic. Nobody was talking about wealth. Nobody was talking about business. They were all talking
mm,
about what brought them pleasure. And I think the
mm,
point of that is that, like, if you start to release yourself and admit, I want to make money, I'm going to do it, and you see that horizon, then you can actually release yourself into being happier and enjoy yourself and
mm.
finding time with friends and people you enjoy. And it's not easy, but it's a path that you can see forward. And billionaires actually do that. Nobody's talking about how to make more money. They do. They absolutely do make more money, but they also really value what, I think it comes back to the basics, the people around them and their families.
Yeah. If some of your basic needs are met, like what is the next step, right? And so,
Right.
um, I love
Right.
this concept. So I will say it's been an absolute pleasure discussing the healthcare landscape with you, but also on the personal side, all these great tidbits. Your insights are extremely useful, and I love that we can share a lot of the more personal perspectives and life philosophies. So, thank you for sharing your knowledge, and thank you for the impactful work that you're doing. So, listeners, for more on Kavita's work, you can email her at drkavitapatel@gmail.com. We will link it in the show notes. We hope today's conversation has sparked your curiosity and inspired you to explore further. So thanks again for joining us. And until next time, keep on innovating. Did you know that improving preventive care can significantly impact your health plan star ratings? Everly Health Solutions is the leader in at-home testing for health plans. Their convenient, member-centric approach has helped plans achieve industry-leading results. In just 1 year, Everly Health Solutions helped a multi-state Medicare group improve 15 of their plans by at least 1 star. That's a win for members, providers, and the plans themselves. Learn how Everly Health Solutions can elevate your health plan at everlyhealthsolutions.com.